It's a surprise appointment, to be sure. Corruption buster Advocate Andy Mothibi has his work cut out for him as the new head of the National Prosecuting Authority. That's from February 1st. But does his bypassing of this interview process sour the start of his new position? And what about concerns over his current age? Specialist legal journalist Karyn Maughan comes out of holiday hibernation to fill us in next.
He said to us last night that he had been approached after the panel said that there wasn't a single suitable candidate amongst those six current and former NPA, leaders that were interviewed by the panel. And, the question remains, well, especially given the discrepancies in payment between SIU officials and NPA officials, which have been bemoaned by Braai in Parliament, what deal or agreement was reached for him to take this job?
Later in our trending topic, another potential day zero scenario of dangerously low water levels looms large for the beloved tourist town of Knysna. And finally, we look back at the 1957 bus boycott with On This Day in South African History. That's our regular segment heard at the end of the show.
New episodes of The Lead air Monday through Thursday at 7 p.m.
Well, from today, we've got a new daily segment that's called The Lead's Pointless Braai Quiz. Well, today's question is this. Who's set to replace Advocate Andy Mothibi as acting head of the Special Investigating Unit from February 1st? Well, I'll give you the answer at the end of the show, right after On This Day in South African History. If you get it right, you score absolutely zilch, nada, nothing, except the quiet satisfaction of sounding very informed around the Braai place. Sound good? Please, no Googling. My name's Graeme Robenheimer, this is The Lead, and this is the South African Story. Moving to our top story today, well, she's technically still in holiday mode, but specialist legal journalist Karyn Maughan could not let the opportunity to report on this very surprising NDPP appointment pass her by. Karyn, how's it? Welcome to your very first 2026 edition of The Lead. How are you doing?
I am excellent, but obviously quite fascinated about this story and its implications for the NPA.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I don't think any of us in the media fraternity particularly saw this one coming, although his name did come up quite early on some time back in relation to whether or not he would be interviewing for this particular position. But here's Advocate Andy Mothibi being named in that statement by the presidency just last night. He's got quite a reputation, of course, as this fearless corruption buster. He seems to be very clean and leaves a good legacy at the Special Investigating Unit, which he's now soon going to vacate.
I mean, the big question is, obviously, with the Special Investigating Unit is that it has a civil onus in terms of, proving, being able to justify the seizure of assets, the freezing of assets, etc. And that's a very different game plan, as it were, when one compares to the criminal onus beyond reasonable doubt. He does have a history as serving as a prosecutor. But it remains to be seen whether this very different role, which really relates to the investigation of alleged corruption and then the seizure of assets as part of that investigation process, will translate into the effective corruption busting that the NPA so desperately needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's kind of look back at the interview process that took place in December to find the next suitable candidate to take over from NPA boss Shamila Braai. That's coming now to an end, of course, her tenure at the end of January. That panel appointed, it did not come without of its, side issues, so to speak. First, there was concerns that the panel itself weren't necessarily made up of prosecutors, past or present. And then there was also this legal case brought by Barnabas Kulu. And then really after the entire process, I remember speaking to Jan Gerbe in the newsroom because I didn't really awfully follow that interview process all too much. I was busy with other things at the time. But there weren't necessarily any clear, okay, this person's going to be the next sort of suitable candidate to take over from Braai. Or was I wrong?
I think the two strongest candidates by far were Hermine Cornier, who was the former investigating directorate head who resigned from the NPA, in quite a sort of shocking turn of developments, and then came back, which I think Nicole Fritz has pointed out very much indicated a particular difficulty that she may have had with the former NDPP, Shamila Batoy, though she didn't vocalize that in her interview. And then, of course, Golisile Kanyile, who, of course, was a former prosecutor in a very senior leadership position in the NPA, and also the former head of the Financial Intelligence Center. Those two really of the six, and of course we can't forget Menzi Simelane, the ousted NPA head, who's currently facing the Johannesburg Society of Advocates attempting to have him struck from the role because of professional misconduct that he's been found guilty of. They were really the two strongest candidates. And I think the wide expectation was that either one of them might be the new NDPP.
Yeah, let's look at News 24's voting booth for the day. And I've actually never done this for the lead before, but it's so pertinent right now. And the question being put forward to our readers today, Karyn, is what are your thoughts on SIU head Andy Mothibi's appointment as NDPP? Now, there were various options, but the clear frontrunner in terms of the total 1,000 votes cast across all the categories thus far this Wednesday, the most votes go to the option bypassing the interviews taints his appointment. And I can't help but feel the same way.
And I think, Nicole Fritz, Glenys Breitenbach, the DA MP, herself a former prosecutor, she said to me, look, I have no issue with Andy Mothibi. He is fairly highly regarded, as you said in your introduction, no real hint of scandal. And certainly, not any kind of indication that he wouldn't have been a suitable candidate. But bypassing that very grueling interview process that all the other candidates were subjected to, even though it's not constitutionally required, the president has the constitutional power to really appoint anyone as the head of the NPA as long as they fit within those requirements of being fit and proper and having the requisite and appropriate experience in that regard. Unfortunately does raise questions. And there are going to be further questions about why he didn't apply for that position in the first place and under what conditions he's agreed to take that job. He said to us last night that he had been approached after the panel said that there wasn't a single suitable candidate amongst those six current and former NPA, leaders that were interviewed by the panel. And, the question remains, well, especially given the discrepancies in payment between SIU officials and NPA officials, which have been bemoaned by Batoy in Parliament, what deal or agreement was reached for him to take this job?
Yeah, it doesn't mean he takes a pay cut. And of course, the presidency will come out and say this is all constitutionally sound, right?
That's exactly what they've said. When I spoke to Vincent Magwenya yesterday, he stressed, he said, Ramaphosa had really done something quite unique in terms of the appointment of Shamila Batoy. That was, of course, the first time in democratic South African history that we saw a panel then led by the Justice Minister overseeing this interview process, the shortlisting process, and then, of course, multiple candidates, very senior NPA officials then being interviewed. And, of course, you'll remember in that process that Andrea Johnson was shortlisted for the position of NDPP. And now all these years later, after somewhat of a disastrous interview in which she was really questioned at length about her testimony at the ad hoc committee investigating Nhlanhla Nkosazana's allegations of criminal infiltration, she has now been found to not meet those requirements. So, in some respects, Ramaphosa is a victim of his own desire to make this NPA process, appointment process, more inclusive and consultative. But, given the obvious discrepancies between that first process with Batoy and the shortlisting and the way in which there was transparency over that, and this current process, I think that this controversy is going to continue, particularly in circumstances where, because of the Madlanga Commission, because of the ad hoc committee investigating Nkosazana's allegations, there is so much public anger and desire to see proper, and effective prosecution of organized crime and corruption.
Yeah, and I think to the frustrated South African, and I'm just being devil's advocate for 2 seconds, Karyn, and of course my argument here might not even hold a lot of water, but they might go like, oh, well, this has all just been a waste of taxpayers' money anyway. for somebody that didn't even have to interview for the process, gets appointed any case. That Barnabas Xulu case, do you think that'll be pursued further? I know it was a bit of a sideshow.
I don't think it can be. I mean, the court will just say it's moot. The president has appointed someone outside of that process. She was, Hermione Cronje on the version of what the presidency put out was found to be an unsuitable candidate. We don't know why at this point. There are continued question marks over that. But essentially, the relief that he's seeking is effectively null and void. Of course, we know the DA also was threatening legal action if Ramaphosa appointed anyone as a consequence of the process that saw Menzi Simelane being effectively interviewed by this panel. Of course, Minister Mamoloko Kubai denying that he had been shortlisted for the position, but certainly a lot of mixed messages from the panel in that regard. But, remains to be seen. I don't know if there's any potential for litigation, given that the president has the constitutional powers to make this appointment in any way he chooses to make fit. But there are political and rationality questions that will remain over this process, and certainly not the ideal circumstances under which Andy Mothibi would have wanted to go into this position.
Yeah, I can't agree more. Okay, who takes over from the SIU in the interim? And, what do you think about that particular person coming in and what the SIU's achieved thus far? Because, we've seen some good work, some solid cases being built.
Well, the current Chief Operations Officer of the SIU, Leonard Leketo, has now been appointed as the acting head of the SIU. Of course, the SIU has had a number of very public successes in sort of the freezing and investigation of a number of cases of corruption, not least of all, back in the day, Bosasa, social grants, the Digital Vibes case. Our colleagues in the investigations unit have also, in terms of the Tembisa hospital looting, etc., Jeff Wicks, we know about the work that they've been doing there. But, at the time, and I interviewed Andy Mothibi a few years ago, he said and expressed in relation to Digital Vibes that the SIU would love to have the ability to prosecute those cases. He referred to cases where, in the relation to social grants, the SIU was given the ability to prosecute and said, the NPA could potentially give it this ability, and they were effectively chomping at the bit to be able to do this. And of course, that didn't happen in his tenure. But now, in this new position, he has the ability to do what he's always wanted to do and take some of those high complex corruption cases that the SIU has been dealing with and really translate them into effective prosecutions. And it might be a very, a renewed era of cooperation between the SIU and the NPA in the years to come.
Yeah, and then it might be, Karyn, that the discussion that we're having right now will end up, in hindsight, looking like a little bit of a storm in a teacup if there are results at the end of it all. Just saying. What work has Mothibi cut out for him? Just very quickly, I mean, jeepers, we'll need a whole nother show to go down into the context of how the NPA is challenging on many fronts. We've seen NPA Deputy Director Anton du Plessis also leave the NPA. What do we know about the current challenges and the capacity?
Well, the biggest question is, of course, that the upper echelons of the NPA's leadership are basically absent. The former head of the AFU has, her term came to an end, Omar Rasataba. We also know Anton du Plessis, resigned alongside Hermione Cronje. Rodney de Kock passed away. His role has been filled in an acting capacity by Sibongile Mzanyati, but, there's no one's been appointed there. So there is a devastating lack of leadership at the upper echelons of the NPA. Interestingly enough, Graeme, one of the biggest questions we have at this point is, and I think this is, we've put these questions to both the presidency and to the Justice Department, is it is very likely, it seems almost very likely that Advocate Mothibi may have accepted this position on the basis that his salary is increased. That Shamila Batoy's salary is increased in line with what he was getting as the SIU head. And if that has indeed happened, under the provisions of the NPA Act, the deputies and the DPPs who lead the prosecuting authority in the various provinces, their salary is at 85% and 80% of what the NPA head receives. So they will then get an uptake in salary, and we could see quite a renewed sort of, which Shamila Batoy had been pushing throughout her term, greater salaries for people in leadership positions in the NPA. It's been one of the big issues that Batoy raised. And of course, we cannot forget the excruciating last scenes of her tenure as NDPP in the childcare inquiry, where she left under circumstances that continue to create great alarm and question marks over the accountability process for Andrew Chalke, but it very much looks like that inquiry into his fitness may be dead in the water at this point. And one remains to be seen whether Chalke then returns to that position in circumstances where his fitness has been put through this process that turned into such a debacle, and what the implications are for the leadership, for the DPPs, and for, of course, Mothibi going into what is essentially, at best case analysis, a hornet's nest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I surmise probably we'll only get a lot more answers to all the questions that we put forth in this particular show while into February, potentially March, when the Advocate gives his first sort of media press conference. As we speak, Advocate Glynis Breitenbach for the Democratic Alliance has just issued a statement, Karyn. And I didn't think of this, but Glynis writes the following for the DA. Mothibi is well suited to lead the NPA, and the DA is quote-unquote cautiously optimistic about the appointment, but then goes on to say, quote-unquote, at 63 years of age, he has an extremely limited opportunity to make any impact at all and will have his work cut out for him. Do you stand by that argument as well, that perhaps the age will work against him?
Well, I've just got a comment from you from the Vincent Magwenya, of course, is the presidency spokesperson. He, I'm not sure if Mothibi is 62 or 63, but he is in that age bracket. And Magwenya is saying to me that the 3 or 2 years will be sufficient to enable a succession plan for a more long-term candidate appointment. So that is a direct comment from the presidency in response to Breitenbach on that issue.
Sure. Well, there you go. Karyn, thanks so much. Please return to your holiday enjoyment before you have to, get ready for all of these topics and some more at the helm of the legal desk at News 24 in 2026. I really do appreciate your time on the lead.
Thank you, Graeme.
Trending topic.
Moving to our trending topic, and the coastal tourist town of Knysna is heading for its own potential day zero scenario as the water crisis deepens to levels we've not seen in the Western Cape since Cape Town's 2017 drought. The local municipality reports now that amid level 4 water restrictions, the local main Akkerkloof Dam has now dropped to 20% following poor seasonal rains. If current levels of residents' consumption continue, it leaves Knysna with just 13 days left of water. Various major authorities in the form of a Joint Operations Committee, or JOC for short, have been working around the clock in recent weeks to ensure that the town does not go completely dry. But they do warn now that they're in full-blown crisis mode. Previously, the local government department in the province warned Knysna's households guilty of guzzling the most water of possible punishments. It also maintains that the water is currently safe to drink, they're plugging leaks and aging infrastructure, and that the local estuary is no longer as polluted as it once was. But the holidays didn't do Knysna any favors, with travelers constantly having to be reminded to use water sparingly. And now the nearby city of George is also putting water restrictions in place, at least for now. What say you? Drop us a comment below.
Looking for a smarter weekend scroll? The Weekender is your ultimate guide to bold stories, sharp opinion, and a fresh lens on life in Mzansi. From exclusive interviews and powerful essays to wine picks, playlists, and pop culture gems, it's your perfect weekend read all in one place, landing every Saturday on News 24. And finally,
finally ending off with our regular segment on this day in South African history. That's the 7th of January 1957. Well, when bus company Putco increased fares in that year, it sparked widespread resistance because at the time, more than 80% of black South Africans lived below the poverty line. They simply could not afford higher transport costs. Now, on the 7th of January, residents formed the Alexandra People's Transport Committee to lead this boycott. What began in Alexandra quickly spread to Sophiatown, Germiston, Edenvale, Pretoria, and Attridgeville, as well as Lady Selborne. Now, for months, commuters had walked long distances to work. They faced ongoing police harassment. Eventually, a compromise, though, was reached around 1st April. Passengers were allowed to buy tickets at the old price, whilst government had investigated wage increases and long-term transport solutions. But by June, the state doubled the employer levy to use to subsidize transport for black Africans, securing the return of the original fare and marking a major victory for collective action. Well, if you're looking for the answer in today's pointless Braai quiz, well, this is, of course, our new daily segment on the show. It's called the Leeds Pointless Braai Quiz. And today's question was this: who's set to replace Advocate Andy Mothibi as acting head of the Special Investigating Unit from February 1st? Well, if you're listening carefully to what Karyn was telling us in her crossing, the answer is, of course, Leonard Lekgetho. Well, if this was your answer all along, congratulations. You score absolutely nothing, zilch. But you can enjoy the quiet satisfaction of sounding very informed around the Braai. Thanks so much for choosing The Lead as your choice news podcast this festive season. We really do appreciate it. The show has been firmly climbing the Apple charts, and we're about to hit 1 million listens across the board. Well, my name's Graeme Robenheimer. So long as there's trusted news first, we'll always have The Lead.